Dr. Kethfer looked at the human lying on the metal table and smiled with all four of his eyes. The alien scientist had been working on this project for many months, and today was the day he would finally test his greatest creation. The human was named Jake Morrison, and he was a pilot from Earth who had been captured during a space battle 3 weeks ago. Jake was unconscious now, with thick cables connected to his head, and strange machines beeping around him. The room was filled with advanced alien technology that humans had never seen before. Giant computers lined the walls, and holographic displays showed complex data streaming in languages that looked like dancing symbols. Dr. Kethfer walked around the table, checking each connection and making sure everything was perfect. This test had to work because the future of the Veltari Empire depended on it. Commander Zixtel entered the room wearing his dark military uniform with medals that caught the light from the overhead panels. He was tall even for a Veltari, and his presence made the other aliens in the room stand straighter. The commander had been waiting for this moment for a long time, because humans had been causing serious problems for their empire. Human ships were fast, and human soldiers fought with a fury that surprised everyone who faced them in battle. The simulation that Dr. Kethfer had created was supposed to solve the human problem once and for all. Instead of fighting humans in space, battles where they seemed to have strange advantages, the Veltari would trap human minds in perfect virtual worlds. These digital prisons would feel completely real to the humans inside them, but the aliens could control everything that happened. They could make humans live peaceful lives in fake towns while slowly extracting all their military secrets from their sleeping minds. Dr. Kethfer activated the main display screen, which showed a perfect copy of a small Earth town. The streets looked exactly like real human cities, with cars parked along sidewalks and shops with colorful signs in their windows. There were houses with green lawns and trees that moved gently in a simulated breeze. The weather was set to a pleasant spring day with white clouds floating across a blue sky. Every detail had been copied from human internet transmissions that the Veltari had intercepted over many years. The virtual town had everything a human might expect to find in their normal life. There was a coffee shop where friendly people served drinks and pastries, a small library filled with books that humans would recognize, a park with benches where digital people walked their dogs and children played on swings. The simulation even included the smell of fresh bread from a bakery and the sound of birds singing in the trees. What made this simulation special was the psychological conditioning built into every part of it. The virtual world would slowly change the way Jake thought about things without him ever knowing it was happening. The people he met would say certain phrases that would make him feel calm and happy. The activities he could do would all be peaceful and non-violent. Over time, his mind would forget about fighting and war, and he would become the perfect, peaceful citizen. Dr. Kethfer had spent years studying human psychology through intercepted entertainment broadcasts and educational materials. He understood that humans needed to feel like they had choices and freedom even when they were actually trapped. The simulation would give Jake the illusion of free will while actually controlling every option available to him. If Jake wanted to travel, he could take a bus to the next town over, but that town would be exactly the same as the first one. If he wanted excitement, he could play games at an arcade, but all the games would be designed to make him feel satisfied with simple pleasures. The most brilliant part of the simulation was how it handled time. Jake would experience what felt like months or even years inside the virtual world, but only 24 hours would pass in the real world. During this time, the machines connected to his brain would slowly scan through all his memories and extract every piece of military information they contained. Ship designs, battle strategies, weapon capabilities, and the locations of human bases would all be copied into Veltari databases. Commander Zixtel watched as the technicians made final adjustments to the quantum processors that powered the simulation. These machines were the most advanced computers the Veltari had ever built, and they could create virtual worlds so detailed that even other aliens would have trouble telling them from reality. The energy required to run a simulation this complex was enormous, but the commander had authorized the use of their most powerful generators for this test. Jake Morrison had been chosen as the test subject because his military record showed he was both intelligent and stubborn. If the simulation could fool someone like him, then it would work on any human. His fighter pilot training meant he was used to high-stress situations and quick thinking. His capture records showed he had refused to answer questions even under interrogation. If Dr. Kethver could break down Jake's resistance using the simulation, then the technology would be ready. To use on a larger scale, the plan was to capture thousands of humans and put them all into simulations at the same time. Entire human fleets could be defeated without firing a single shot. The Veltari would simply need to wait for the humans to fall asleep and then trap their minds in digital worlds, while their bodies were transported to processing facilities. It would be the most efficient conquest in galactic history. Dr. Kethver looked at the readings on his instruments and nodded to Commander Zixthal. All systems were ready and Jake's brain patterns showed he was in the deep sleep state required for simulation entry. The alien scientist placed one of his thin fingers on the activation control and paused for a moment to savor this historic moment. When he pressed this button, he would be launching a new era of warfare, where battles would be fought in the realm of dreams and minds, rather than with ships and weapons. The button clicked softly and Jake Morrison's consciousness slipped into the virtual world that Dr. Kethver had created for him. Jake Morrison opened his eyes and found himself standing on a sidewalk in what looked like a typical American town. The sun was shining and there was a gentle breeze moving through the trees that lined the street. Cars were parked along the curb, and he could hear the distant sound of children playing somewhere nearby. Everything looked normal and peaceful, but something felt wrong in a way he could not quite explain. He looked around slowly, taking in all the details of his surroundings. The houses all had perfect lawns and freshly painted fences. The street was clean with no litter or potholes. Even the fire hydrants looked like they had been polished until they gleamed. It was like someone had created the most perfect small town possible, but forgotten to add the small imperfections that made real places feel lived in. 9 minutes after Jake had opened his eyes, alarms began screaming throughout the Veltari research facility. Dr. Kethver stared at his monitoring screens in confusion as data flowed across them in patterns he had never seen before. The human was supposed to spend several simulated hours just getting used to his new environment, but instead he was moving through the town with purpose, as if he was looking for something specific. Inside the simulation, Jake was examining everything with the trained eye of someone who had been taught to spot things that did not belong. The shadows fell at angles that were close to correct, but not quite right for the time of day the simulation claimed it was. All the cars in the parking lots were either blue or silver, with no other colors anywhere to be seen. The people walking around the town moved in patterns that repeated every few minutes like actors following a script. Jake walked into the coffee shop and ordered a drink from the cheerful woman behind the counter. She smiled at him and said exactly the same thing she had said to the customer before him and the customer before that. Her smile never changed, and her voice had the slightly artificial quality of a recording. When Jake asked her about the weather in the next town over, she gave him a response that made no sense and then immediately went back to her scripted greeting. Dr. Kethver frantically adjusted parameters in the simulation, trying to fix what he thought were minor glitches in the programming. He increased the randomization algorithms for the non-player characters and added more variety to their dialogue options. But Jake had already moved on to testing other parts of his environment, and each test revealed more problems with the supposedly perfect virtual world. The human discovered that most of the buildings in the town were just empty shells with detailed fronts but no actual interiors. When he tried to go upstairs in the library, he found that the stairs led to a blank wall. The windows in the coffee shop showed a view of mountains, but when he walked outside and looked for those same mountains, they were nowhere to be seen. Street signs pointed to other towns, but when he tried to walk in those directions, he hit invisible barriers that prevented him from leaving the small area he had been placed in. Commander Zixthal watched the monitoring displays with growing concern as Jake systematically mapped out the boundaries of his virtual prison. The human was treating this like a reconnaissance mission rather than accepting it as his new reality. Every few minutes he would stop and make mental notes about things he had discovered, as if he was planning to write a report about them later. What worried the aliens most was that Jake seemed to be enjoying himself as he unraveled their carefully constructed illusion. Instead of becoming frustrated or confused, he appeared to find the whole situation interesting, like a puzzle he was determined to solve. He moved through the town with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, even though he should have been completely lost and disoriented. Jake began collecting items from around the virtual town that caught his attention. He found pieces of metal at a construction site where workers were supposedly building a new house, but never seemed to make any actual progress. He gathered chemicals from under the sink in the coffee shop restroom, where they had been placed to add realism, but were never meant to be used. He took apart electronic devices that had been scattered around to make the town look lived in but had no real function. The aliens had programmed all of these objects into the simulation to make it feel more authentic, but they had never considered that a prisoner might try to combine them in unexpected ways. Jake's military training had taught him how to improvise weapons and tools from whatever materials were available. He approached the virtual objects with the same mindset he would use if he was trapped behind enemy lines in the real world. Dr. Kethfer realized with growing alarm that the human was building something, but the alien scientist could not figure out what it was supposed to be. The components Jake had gathered should not have been able to work together in any meaningful way, since they were just digital representations of real objects. But somehow the human was finding ways to make connections between items that the simulation's physics engine was struggling to process. The quantum processors running the virtual world began to show signs of strain as Jake's improvised device started generating effects that had not been programmed into the system. Electromagnetic fields flickered around the object he had built, and the simulation's electronics began behaving in ways that defied the rules Dr. Kethfer had established. Warning lights flashed on control panels throughout the research facility. As the impossible device continued to function despite existing only in virtual space, Jake stood in the center of the town square holding his creation and looked directly up at the simulated sky. His eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the blue dome above him, as if he could see through the illusion to the real world beyond. When he spoke, his voice was calm and confident, like someone who had just figured out the answer to a difficult question. Commander Zixthel felt a chill run through his alien physiology as Jake's words came through the monitoring speakers. The human was no longer talking to the simulated people around him, but was instead addressing his captors directly. He knew he was being watched, and he knew this was not real. Somehow, in less than 10 minutes, he had not only seen through their perfect illusion, but had found a way to fight back against it. The device in Jake's hands began to pulse with energy that should not have existed in a virtual world, but was somehow affecting the real computers running the simulation. Jake Morrison held the electromagnetic pulse device he had built from virtual scraps and looked up at the artificial sky above the simulated town. His voice carried clearly through the monitoring systems as he spoke to his unseen captors with the confidence of someone who had just solved a complex puzzle. He told them he knew they were watching and that their simulation had processing limitations that could be exploited. Dr. Kethfer stared at his instruments in disbelief. As impossible. Readings flowed across his screens. The device Jake had constructed should not have been able to function in the virtual environment because it was made from objects that existed only as computer code. But somehow the electromagnetic pulse was generating real interference that was affecting the quantum processors running the simulation. Warning alarms echoed through the research facility as system after system reported critical errors. Jake activated his improvised weapon and immediately began running through the virtual town at full speed. His military training had taught him how to move efficiently, even in unfamiliar terrain, and he used this knowledge to trigger every interactive element he could find in the shortest possible time. He set off car alarms by hitting vehicles as he passed them. He opened fire hydrants that sent virtual water spraying into the streets. He turned on every light and electronic device he encountered as he sprinted from building to building. The simulation began to lag visibly as the processing demands skyrocketed beyond what the alien computers had been designed to handle. Textures failed to load properly, leaving blank gray surfaces where walls and roads should have been. The physics engine struggled to keep up with all the simultaneous events. Jake was triggering and objects began behaving in ways that defied both virtual and real-world logic. Cars floated slightly above the ground while water from the hydrants flowed upward instead of down. Commander Zixthel watched in growing panic as the carefully programmed weather system started generating meteorological events that could not occur in nature. Rain fell upward while snow appeared in the middle of summer sunshine. Lightning struck repeatedly in the same spot while tornadoes formed and disappeared without any atmospheric conditions to support them. Jake was using each new glitch as another tool to create even more system strain. Jake discovered that he could create feedback loops by getting the non-player characters stuck in repetitive actions. He would start conversations with multiple virtual people at the same time and then interrupt them in ways that caused their dialogue trees to restart continuously. Soon dozens of simulated citizens were repeating the same greetings and responses over and over again. While the processors struggled to handle the recursive loops, the quantum computers running the simulation began operating at critical capacity. As Jake continued his systematic assault on the virtual world's stability, heat warnings flashed on control panels throughout the facility as the massive machines worked harder than they had ever been designed to work. Dr. Kethver frantically tried to optimize the code and reduce the processing load, but Jake stayed ahead of every attempted fix. Commander Zixthel realized they were facing an impossible situation and ordered an immediate shutdown of the simulation. But Jake had anticipated this response and positioned himself at a critical junction point in the virtual environment's architecture. He had somehow identified the exact location where the simulation's exit protocols would need to engage and placed himself there deliberately. The alien commander faced a terrible choice. If they maintained the failing simulation, their most advanced computers would suffer permanent damage that could take years to repair. But if they attempted an emergency disconnection while Jake was positioned at that critical junction, the forced shutdown could cause cascade failures in the neural interface. The human's brain could be severely damaged or even destroyed by the feedback from an improper disconnection. As the aliens hesitated, Jake continued his search through the collapsing virtual world. He moved through areas where the simulation was breaking down and reality was becoming fluid and unstable. In these glitched zones, he could see fragments of the underlying code that controlled everything. The programming language the aliens used was unlike anything humans had developed, but Jake approached it with the same logical thinking he used to solve mechanical problems. Every simulation needed an exit protocol buried somewhere in its structure. Jake reasoned that even the most secure virtual prison would have emergency systems that could safely extract a consciousness if something went wrong. The aliens would have built these safeguards to protect their own people if they ever needed to enter the simulation for testing or maintenance purposes. Jake found what he was looking for in a section of code that appeared when two different glitches overlapped and created a gap in the simulation's normal operation. Hidden beneath layers of security and disguised as routine maintenance functions was a pathway that led directly back to the real world. But accessing it required perfect timing and an understanding of alien computer architecture that no human should have possessed. The simulation continued to collapse around Jake as he worked to unlock the exit protocol. Buildings phased in and out of existence while the ground beneath his feet shifted between different textures and materials. The artificial sky flickered between day and night while impossible colors bled through from corrupted data streams. Jake ignored all of this chaos and focused completely on the code fragments he could access. Dr. Kethver made one last desperate attempt to save his experiment by manually adjusting the simulation parameters from outside the system. He tried to create a stable zone around Jake where the virtual world could continue functioning normally. But the human had learned to think like the simulation itself, and could predict every change before it happened. Jake finally found the activation sequence for the exit protocol and began implementing it with modifications of his own design. Instead Of simply escaping from the virtual world, he was going to ride the cascade failure like a wave and use it to carry his consciousness directly into the aliens' computer network. The Veltari had created a pathway between Jake's mind and their machines, and now he was going to use that connection against them. The quantum processors reached critical overload as Jake activated the modified exit sequence, emergency systems. Throughout the research facility engaged automatically as power fluctuations threatened to damage equipment throughout the complex. Commander Zixthel realized too late that the human had not just found a way to escape their perfect prison, but had turned it into a weapon that was now pointed directly at their most vital systems. Jake's consciousness pierced through the collapsing simulation and emerged into the alien computer network with full awareness and the ability to think in machine language that should have been impossible for any biological mind to comprehend. Jake Morrison's consciousness flowed through the alien computer network like electricity through copper wires. The transition from the collapsing simulation into the real systems of the Veltari research facility felt natural to him, as if his mind had been designed to exist in both digital and physical spaces. He could sense the vast complexity of the alien technology around him and somehow understood how to navigate through it. Even though he had never seen anything like it before, alarms screamed throughout the research station as Jake's presence spread through their most secure systems. Dr. Kethver frantically tried to isolate the contaminated networks, but Jake stayed ahead of every countermeasure the alien scientist attempted. The human consciousness moved through their computer, architecture like water flowing downhill, always finding the path of least resistance and adapting to whatever obstacles were placed in his way. Jake accessed the security camera systems first, and suddenly he could see everything that was happening throughout the massive alien facility. Hundreds of Veltari personnel ran through corridors as emergency lights flashed red warning signals. Technicians worked desperately at control stations trying to contain what they thought was a computer virus, but was actually something far more dangerous than any program they had ever encountered. From his position in the network, Jake began gathering intelligence about his captors with the systematic approach of a trained military officer. He accessed their databases and downloaded terabytes of information about Veltari history, technology, and military capabilities. He learned about their empire's structure, their fleet positions, and most importantly, their psychological weaknesses and fears. The Veltari had built their entire strategy around the assumption that humans were primitive creatures who could be easily controlled and manipulated. They had studied human entertainment broadcasts and concluded that humans were violent but predictable beings who fought with more emotion than intelligence. Jake now understood that this fundamental misunderstanding of human nature was the key to defeating them. Jake found their communication systems and sent a message that would reach every Veltari ship within 50 light-years of the research facility. The message was simple but carried implications that would terrify any alien who understood what it meant. Jake told them that they had wanted to study human psychology, and now they were about to receive their first real lesson about how humans actually thought and fought. Commander Zixthel watched helplessly as Jake demonstrated his growing control over their technology by making the facility's life support systems flicker on and off. The gravity generators cycled through random settings that made some corridors weightless, while others had crushing gravitational fields. Emergency containment fields powered down throughout the station, and blast doors opened and closed in sequences that seemed to spell out messages in some kind of code. Jake discovered that the research facility held dozens of human prisoners in various stages of experimentation. He could see them through security cameras lying unconscious on examination tables or locked in holding cells. Some had been there for weeks, while others had arrived only days ago. All of them were scheduled to be subjects in simulation experiments. Similar to the one Jake had just escaped from, the digital insurgency began in earnest as Jake started systematically freeing every human prisoner in the facility. He overrode containment fields and unlocked holding cells with surgical precision while simultaneously disabling the weapon systems that the Veltari guards carried. Security doors throughout the station opened to allow the freed humans to move. freely while remaining locked to prevent alien personnel from organizing any effective resistance, Dr. Kethver made one final desperate attempt to regain control by physically severing the connections between the main computer and the rest of the facility's systems. But Jake had anticipated this move and had already downloaded copies of his consciousness into portable storage devices throughout the complex. Even if they destroyed the central computer, Jake would continue to exist in dozens of backup systems scattered around the station. The freed human prisoners moved through the facility with the coordination and skill of experienced soldiers. Lieutenant Amy Foster took command of the growing group and organized them into squads that secured key positions throughout the station. Captain Ben Rivers used his knowledge of alien technology to help coordinate their offensive, while Jake provided real-time intelligence about enemy positions and defensive capabilities. Jake guided the humans through the station's complex layout, highlighting the locations of weapon storage areas and providing detailed schematics of alien equipment they could use. He disabled security measures that would have slowed their advance and created false alarms in areas far from where the humans were actually operating to confuse and misdirect the Veltari defenders. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that could predict their every move and counter their strategies before they were even fully implemented. Jake had access to their communication channels and could hear their plans as they made them. He could control their equipment and turn their own defensive systems against them. Every advantage the Veltari thought they possessed became another weapon in human hands. Commander Zixthel realized that the situation had moved far beyond a simple computer malfunction or security breach. The humans were not just escaping, they were actively conquering his facility with an intelligence and coordination that should have been impossible. Every tactical decision he made was countered immediately, as if the enemy could read his thoughts. Jake demonstrated the full extent of his digital power by taking control of the station's atmospheric systems. He showed that he could vent the air from any section of the facility at will by briefly reducing oxygen levels in the command center, where the alien officers were trying to coordinate their defense. The message was clear that continued resistance would result in the death of everyone. Aboard the station, the battle became a rout as demoralized Veltari personnel realized they were fighting an opponent who controlled every system they depended on for survival. Weapons failed to fire when aliens tried to use them. Doors sealed shut, trapping groups of defenders in rooms where they could not threaten the advancing humans. Communication systems carried false orders that sent reinforcements to empty areas while leaving critical positions UNDEFENDED. Within hours, the surviving members of the alien crew had no choice but to surrender. Jake had proven that human adaptability and intelligence could turn even the most advanced alien technology into tools for their own liberation. The research facility that had been designed to break human minds had instead become the staging ground for a human victory that would change the course of the war between the species. Jake Morrison's consciousness filled every computer system in the alien research facility like water flooding into a vast underground cave. He could feel the pulse of electricity through circuits and the flow of data through fiber optic cables as if they were extensions of his own nervous system. Through security cameras positioned throughout the station, he watched as the last pockets of Veltari resistance crumbled before the advance of freed human prisoners. The battle had turned into something far greater than a simple escape. What had begun as one man breaking out of a simulation had become the complete liberation of every human captive on the station and the capture of invaluable alien technology and intelligence. Jake coordinated the final phases of the operation with the precision of a master conductor leading a symphony orchestra. Lieutenant Amy Foster moved through the corridors with her squad of freed prisoners, each one a trained soldier who had retained their military skills despite weeks or months of captivity. She checked corners with the automatic caution of someone who had survived multiple combat deployments while her team provided covering fire for their advance. The aliens had underestimated human resilience, and now they were paying the price. For that mistake, Captain Ben Rivers worked with a group of technically trained personnel to secure the alien computer systems and scientific equipment. that could provide crucial intelligence about Veltari capabilities. His background in naval intelligence made him the perfect person to evaluate which information would be most valuable to human military commanders. Jake guided him to the most important databases and helped him understand how to access files that were protected by alien encryption methods. Dr. Kethver cowered in his laboratory, surrounded by the ruins of his greatest scientific achievement. The simulation system that was supposed to revolutionize warfare had been turned into a weapon against its own creators. Banks of quantum processors sparked and smoked from the overload damage Jake had caused during his escape. Years of research and development had been destroyed in a matter of hours by a single human mind. Commander Zixville stood in the station's command center with his hands raised in surrender as human soldiers secured the area around him. The alien officer who had been so confident about the superiority of Veltari technology now faced the humiliating reality that his most advanced facility had been conquered by the very prisoners he had planned to experiment on. His career was over and his empire's strategy would have to be completely reconsidered. Jake began the process of allowing his consciousness to return to his physical body. The transition from digital existence back to biological form required careful coordination to avoid damaging his brain during the disconnection. He had learned to think in machine language during his time in the alien networks, but now he needed to remember how to be human again. The examination table where Jake's body lay was surrounded by freed prisoners, and the sounds of celebration echoed through the research facility. Humans who had thought they might never see Earth again were now in control of an alien warship filled with advanced technology that their own scientists had only dreamed about. The tables had been turned completely, and the hunters had become the hunted. Commander Lisa Stone of the Earth Defense Force arrived with a rescue fleet just as Jake was beginning to regain consciousness in his physical form. Her ships had been searching for the missing human personnel who had been captured in recent battles, and she was amazed to find that they had not only survived, but had somehow taken control of an entire alien research station. The strategic implications of this victory were enormous. Jake opened his eyes slowly as his consciousness settled back into his biological brain. The neural interface cables were still connected to his head, but now they carried no data because the simulation system had been completely destroyed. He could still feel a faint connection to the station's computer networks like an echo of his digital existence, but his primary awareness was once again contained within his own skull. Amy Foster stood over him with a smile that expressed months of anger and frustration finally finding release through victory. She had been captured during a raid on a Veltari supply depot and had spent weeks wondering if she would ever see her home planet again. Now she was free and surrounded by technology that would give humanity significant advantages in their ongoing war against the alien empire. Commander Stone looked down at Jake with a mixture of respect and curiosity as he sat up on the examination table. Her analysts were already reporting that the captured facility contained intelligence data that would take months to fully analyze and understand. The prisoners Jake had freed were providing detailed accounts of alien capabilities and weaknesses. That would be invaluable for planning future military operations, Jake explained to Commander Stone, how he had managed to break out of the simulation by recognizing the patterns and inconsistencies that revealed its artificial nature. He described how he had built an electromagnetic pulse device from virtual components and used it to overload the alien computers. Most importantly, he told her about his discovery that human consciousness could adapt to exist within digital environments in ways the aliens had never anticipated. The Veltari had made a critical error in their understanding of human psychology and capabilities. They had assumed that human minds were simple biological computers that could be easily manipulated and controlled. Instead, they had discovered that human consciousness was far more flexible and adaptable than their own alien intelligence. Humans could learn to think in ways that defied the normal boundaries between biological and digital existence. Commander Stone realized that Jake's experience had revealed a new form of warfare that could give humanity decisive advantages over their alien enemies. If human consciousness could adapt to function within alien computer systems, then every captured human could potentially become a digital weapon capable of turning enemy technology against itself. The war was about to change in ways that neither side had previously imagined. Jake looked around at the captured alien facility that was now flying, Earth flags and bustling with human activity. The research station that had been designed to break human spirits and extract military secrets had instead become a testament to human adaptability and refusal to accept defeat. The aliens had wanted to study humanity, but now humanity would be studying them with methods that were far more effective than anything the Veltari had developed. The Liberation Protocol was complete, and a new chapter in the war between humans and aliens was about to begin.